Welcome to Pera's Playbook. This is your host, Alex Pera. Let's open up our playbook and see who our guest is. Please enjoy. Welcome to episode 100 of Pera's Playbook. Today I'm joined by David Zawatson, former NFL player and California Golden Bear. It's kind of funny too. I just actually, about an hour ago, finished recording with a California beach volleyball player who's currently there. So two Cal Golden Bears in the same day. But David, thanks for joining. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. No
Good.
complaints here. And there's a lot we can talk about. There always is when I interview professional athletes. I got to try to
Sure.
narrow it down and generally, start kind of where their pro career started. For you,
Okay.
that'd be the NFL draft, second
Yep.
round pick to the Bears.
Yep.
Kind of talk about that whole experience, like leading up to the draft. Was there draft hype? Were you talking to a lot of teams? Did you kind of expected to get drafted somewhere, in one of the earlier rounds?
Yeah, honestly, I can say no. The I think that the level of draft analysis and insight and really just general knowledge about how certain players project where and whatnot was probably a little bit less advanced back then. Um, and just kind of philosophically also, I was just always one of those kinds of people that if you take care of the pennies, the dollars take care of themselves. And I've always been pretty good at just kind of filtering out a lot of that nonsense. And
Yeah,
people would tell me their opinion, and I'd be like, "That's cool, like thanks, but I'm just going to let chips fall where they may."
yeah,
Um, in the lead up to the draft, I think that I did get contacted a little bit more in the run up to it. As I recall, Denver was a team that had been the coaching staff at the Senior Bowl that I had played in, and I think that I'd had a good camp with them and a good game with them and a good rapport with them. And one of my teammates from a couple of years before that, a guy named Keith Karts, was already there, and so I think there was some interest. Probably just didn't work out from their point of view. And I also know that like the day of the draft, I had been contacted by Cincinnati, and made it pretty clear that they were going to draft me if I was available when that time came. And if I remember correctly, and I may remember it a little bit unclear, it's been such a long time. I believe they were picking like right after or a couple of picks after Chicago did. So having Chicago contact me was a little bit of a surprise. I hadn't really had much contact with them or uh, knew much about them or didn't think that they knew much about me, but I guess I was wrong.
yeah. Who gave you the call? Was it the GM or was it Mike Ditka or
As I recall, it was the general manager, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
did you have a party at your house with family and relatives, or were you
No,
just kind of
it
laying
was just it
low?
was just me, my family. I had a girlfriend in college at that time that was at the house, but again, I was kind of low key in it just
Yeah,
because I really didn't have a strong feeling about how it was going to go.
right.
And so, I just knew there were people out there that had kind of set themselves up for disappointment by overdoing it. And I really didn't want to be in that position. I guess I just kind of felt like, you know what, if it works out well, it works out well. People will know anyway. And if
Yeah.
it doesn't, at least then it's just, me and my family dealing with whatever disappointment that there would be.
Yeah, sometimes it's harder when you build your hopes way up for something and then that exact thing doesn't happen the way you want it to.
Yep. Very true. Truly said.
So once you were drafted, what were the next couple of weeks like for you? I mean, did you head out to Chicago pretty quick after
Yeah,
that?
yeah, they got us out there pretty quickly. And one of the nice things for me at that time was I had a teammate at Cal, a guy named Joe Nelms, who was a defensive lineman with us, who also was drafted by them. And Joe and I had kind of an interesting history in the sense that we had played together in college, and we had played against each other in high school. We were at two different schools, but within the same school district. And Joe interestingly enough, a lot of people used to confuse Joe and I because we looked a lot alike, same height, same build, same hair color, eye color, all that kind of stuff. Really nice guy, had a little bit of time with the Chicago Cubs also as a pitcher in their minor league organization, and was probably going to make the team. We were roommates, and just one day, kind of oddball thing, he went to tie his shoes, and believe it or not, he herniated a disc in his back,
Wow.
and that was the end of things for him. But he and I headed out really early after the draft, and we're together roommates through mini camp and through training camp and whatnot. So that was kind of a nice thing to have, that person that you'd spent at least a couple of years playing football with in college.
Right. Somebody, a familiar face when you're going into a
Yep.
kind of a big change in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was it like to play for Mike Ditka? I mean, he's obviously a legend of, NFL looking back, so I mean, as a rookie and
Yeah.
you're playing for him.
It was interesting. He definitely was a change in demeanor compared to what I was kind of used to.
Yeah.
I had a kind of an interesting experience throughout high school and college. I started my playing career as an athlete or whatever in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. I was originally from Fairview Park, and my parents moved out to California right before I turned 16. I ended up going to a great high school in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area called Ignacio Valley High School. And at that time, they had a wonderful, wonderful athletic program and really a great school in a lot of ways. And my head coach was a really, really great guy named Kent Roby. And, Kent was just one of those kinds of guys that, like, nothing fazed him. He never got upset. You hardly ever saw him lose his temper. He'd come to our practices. We had a whole system of canals that ran through the community that if you didn't want to use the roadways, you could bike or run or ride horseback, whatever. And Kent would jog to practice, and just show up like in his shorts and a backpack and a baseball hat, and then get his thing on. And he was a very, very innovative guy offensively. And so, it was just a real pleasure to be around because he's one of those kinds of guys that could like set a very high expectation without making you feel poorly about yourself at any point in time.
Yeah.
And then at the beginning of my career at Cal, Joe Cap was the head coach. And Joe was a little bit more of a throwback to that kind of 50s, 60s era, kind of loud, confrontational, emotional. Again, I think his heart was in the right place, and I think that he really he wanted us to be successful, and he wanted to treat us like men. But a lot of times that could go in a lot of different directions.
Hmm.
And then he was replaced by a guy named Bruce Schneider. Bruce was very successful at Utah State before he came to us. He'd been a running backs coach for the Rams and then became our head coach. And subsequently after that left and became the head coach at Arizona State. And Bruce was just one of those guys, man, that like I clicked with him. I don't think I ever heard the man curse once. He
Yeah.
was calm. He would let you know with no uncertain terms, like where you stood with him and what you needed to do better. But it was always done in such a way that it was like, we would have meetings with him at periods throughout the school, throughout the year. And he would tell you where you stood, what you needed to do to get better, and how you were going to do it. But that was the important thing. It was like there was a plan and there were resources, and it was really kind of up to you to take advantage of the plan he was laying out for you. But he also made it real clear that like if you're not going to do what I'm asking you to do, then we're just going to find somewhere else for you to be. And there were some guys some friends of mine that he did that with, where it would be like, okay, son, like, where are you going to be happy playing? Because it won't be here. You know, and I just really, I think back fondly to the job that he did with us. And then when I ended up in Chicago, it was a little bit more of a rebound back to the Joe Cap approach to things. They were
Yeah.
contemporary athletes in the NFL at the same time, and I think that was just kind of the way that you treated people. It was loud and it was angry
Yeah.
sometimes, and it was confrontational and, but then the next day it could be hugs and kisses and tears. Like you just, you never knew what you were going to get. So it could be a little discombobulating at times. But listen, there were a lot of great things about it. Chicago's a wonderful town. Had a lot of great teammates, a lot of really nice people that I met. Enjoyed the time that I was there, and I wouldn't speak ill about any part of it. Like everything else in life, right? I mean, you look back and you realize that there were lessons that you learned, and there were lessons that you could have learned that you didn't. You wish you had.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. And so all good stuff.
So were you traded to the Jets or did you
No,
get cut or?
yeah, no, at that time they had a thing called Plan B free agency, which was kind of I guess it was an attempt on their part to manage the desire of players to have some free agency built into the system. Um, And so initially, they had told me that they were not going to allow me to avail myself of that process, which I was fine with. I mean, it was a thing. But then I guess, the way that the general manager explained it to me later was that they had so many players, veteran players, who they were being told, frankly, were going to seek other opportunities if they were given the chance to. And so they decided to utilize their ability to protect the organization from those guys leaving with some of those other guys. And there was an appeal to me to bear in mind that you're new, we just paid you, all this sort of stuff like that. But at the end of the day, my response to that was kind of like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie North Dallas 40.
Mm-mm.
If you
I
haven't, you
I
should
know what
look
it is.
it up. Yeah. And there's a great line in it where one of the players, and I think it was the character played by John Matuzak, um, loses his temper in a locker room at one of the coaches, and I'm going to paraphrase it as best I can remember. And it came down to, I'm confused because when I say it's a game, you tell me it's a business, and when I say it's a business, you tell me it's a game. And my thing was kind of my agent at that time. We both kind of felt like, hey, it's a business, And I mean, if at the end of the day, if you're going to give me an opportunity to see what my value is out on the market, and the only thing that you're going to hold over my head is this sense of loyalty to you, that listen, I've been here for a year. Like, how loyal are you to me or me to you at this point? My attitude was like, listen, if there's nothing better out there, I mean, I'm coming back, but if there's something better out there, I'm going to go. And it really came down to a bit of a bidding war between the Raiders, who were in Los Angeles at the time, and the Jets. And listen, as a California guy, I mean, I was kind of like, hey, look, I'd be happy to head back to LA, but the difference in compensation and things of that nature and opportunity were enough that, like, it really became a no-brainer. And that's how I ended up in New York.
So you stayed in the colder climate.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because, like I said, I grew up on the west side of Cleveland and not that far from the lake. So I was really kind of used to being in snow up to my waist and all that kind of nonsense. But then when you go to California for even the shortest period of time, you you adapt or you unadapt to that in a hurry.
Yeah.
And I never quite got my love of the cold back. I hate to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, there had to be some pretty cold home games there in New York that you had to play in.
Yeah, it's a different kind of cold, I mean, like I would say that the challenge here, and I'm obviously still in the New York metro area, um, is less a degree of how cold it gets, but the combination of just cold enough with really damp. Because you've got the sound to the north of you, you've got the Atlantic Ocean, you've got these big rivers that run through Manhattan. Like, you're a lot of times just surrounded by water, and the combination of wind, water, and high 20s, low 30s can get pretty miserable, man. Like, it's a penetrating cold. I can't describe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so I've had my fair share of, cold winters and lots of snow throughout life.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, no, I know you guys get socked in pretty good up there too.
Yeah,
Um, but I haven't been in a long, long while, but it's a beautiful part of the country.
it is. Yeah, it's got, it's kind of one of those things like in the middle of the winter, people are like, why do we live here? The snow is miserable. I'm shoveling my driveway every day. But then when
Yeah.
it's fall and it's summer and it's beautiful and you can be outside, I mean
Yep.
that's right
Yep.
there. It's worth it.
Yep. Yeah. 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 No, I hear you.
So was it a similar process for you to go from the Jets to the Dolphins?
Um, so basically, what ended up happening is like I was in New York and it was a good experience. It really was. The organization in general treated us really well. My position coach was someone that I had a lot of respect for, was I thought a wonderful teacher. His name was Larry Bechtel. Um, and I felt like I learned a lot playing for him and was doing pretty well. And my biggest problem that ended up erupting on me there was I had injured my elbow pretty badly in Chicago my first year, and in hindsight, and again, I'm not going to turn around and make this into an issue where I felt like the team or any of these teams were terribly abusive to me as far as the way the training staff treated. I always take some responsibility for the fact that like I prided myself on being able to play through injuries, and I prided myself on being tough, and probably there were times when I probably should have been more protective of myself and said like, no, like my elbow is really bad, like I can't play right now, as opposed to no, 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 it's fine, do whatever you need to do in order to make me able to go. And after the season in New York, believe it or not, I came back early and I was working out one day in the weight room, started having terrible problems with my elbow, like loss of sensation down my hand into my fingers and whatnot. And turned out that I needed to have elbow surgery like in February, which is really, really not ideal because I kind of needed like a long time to recover from it. Didn't have that available to me. And, I got into camp that year and really struggled with that. It was very, very hard as an offensive lineman to play when you're kind of limited as to how strong you can be, how much force you can apply with your arms and your hands and stuff. And even though I think I was doing okay and I was there, they did approach me at one point during camp, and apparently it appeared that there was a trade that was possible between them sending me back to Chicago for what I don't know. They didn't tell me who would be coming or anything of that nature. And I really wasn't that fond of the idea for a lot of different reasons. And so myself and my agent kind of expressed to them a unwillingness to go along with that. And they ended up resolving it by just giving me my release and letting me, seek the next best opportunity available to me, which was Miami. And that also, was a pretty great experience in a lot of ways. Um, you know, I don't have a problem with hot weather. Some people do. I was always kind of like, hey man, I can, you have to bear in mind that I was not necessarily the biggest guy out there, like a lot of my peers were 10, 20 pounds heavier than me. I always kind of made my living on being quicker,
Excuse me.
being technically pretty competent, stuff like that. And so to be in an environment where a big guy is actually at a bit of a disadvantage, especially in the first half of the year, was really great for me because sometimes you get into like late second quarter, late fourth quarter, you see guys just totally winded, and we were just trained differently. Like once you go through a camp down there, like you're acclimated, you're ready for it. It is a valid criticism though that like being in that environment when it comes December, January, you got to go up to Buffalo and play. It has the opposite effect on you. No
Right.
doubt about it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that talk about the Dolphins, the current Dolphins, and how they can't win. They had a great regular season team, and Tua's great in the regular season, but it hits the playoffs, and exactly like you said, having to go to Buffalo or somewhere, and they don't play as well, and they can't do it in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, listen, those wide swings in weather can really affect you. And if you're
Yeah.
if you're a cold weather team, you get built a certain way. And if you're a hot weather team that plays outdoors in particular, you get built another way. But those things can come back to haunt you, and I think personally, I'm of the opinion that, people who say that Miami will struggle unless they are able to get like a really high seed, maybe even have home field all throughout the playoffs. There's probably something to that. I mean, it
Yeah.
kind of seems like it demonstrates itself over time.
Right. Yeah, it's more than just a home field advantage for your fans, it's a home field advantage for the weather.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I don't know, man, like I said, hot weather never bothered me, but you put me on a 20-degree field with a minus 15 wind chill and everything else, and I just don't perform the same way. I'm sorry, man. It's just
Yeah. Yeah. Well, down in Miami, there were some great players on that team. Dan
absolutely.
Marino, Mark
Yep.
Clayton, Mark Duper, Richmond Webb, a lot of
Yep.
Hall of Famers,
Yeah.
fantastic players. But one I wanted to mention specifically was Chuck Klingbeil, defensive
Yep.
lineman. He's
Yep.
from my hometown. I went to Houghton
Okay.
High School. He's a Houghton graduate. And
Yep.
actually, his grandparents lived across the street from my mom when she was growing up in high school. So
Oh, cool.
I
Yeah.
thought that was
Yep.
kind of a funny connection when I was
Yep.
looking at the roster that he was there the same year, and I'm assuming you practiced against him being a
Yeah.
defensive lineman and you being an
Sure.
offensive lineman.
Yep. Yep. No, I recall him. A nice guy, as I recall. As I recall him, a kind of a fire plug type of guy. One of those like very thickly built, kind of low to the
Yeah.
ground dudes. That's how I recall him.
Yeah, I was reading in the UP, they have a UP Sports Hall of Fame, and he was inducted back in 2002, and I think it said he broke weightlifting records at every single team he played for. So
Yeah, yeah. As my mental image of him comes up, I can see that being distinctly possible.
yeah. Well, was it cool to play with some of those other guys, Dan
Oh,
Marino and
absolutely.
some of
Yeah,
those.
no, no, no. I mean, listen, it was a great experience. There were a lot of nice things about it. At that time, I think that at that time, I think it was a little bit of a throwback organization, um, in the way that Don Shula ran things. The general manager there was a guy named Charlie Winter. Um, I found that there was a real degree of like candor, between the coaches and the players and whatnot. Like it was one of the few places that I personally experienced where, when you sat down with somebody and asked them a question about, well, why this or why that, or, why am I not playing, or why is this, you came away kind of going like, yeah, I think that's the truth. Like I think the guy just basically told me the truth.
Yeah.
And that wasn't always the case. A lot of times you get this feeling like, well, they're just telling me the politically correct thing to say right now, or they're kind of hedging their bets. They don't want to make me angry or make me upset, so they're just kind of giving me this, pumping a little sunshine on me at this point right now. But it was a different feeling there.
Yeah. That's yeah, I think that's kind of rare sometimes. I mean, stories you read, and obviously you have personal experience, but you look at professional athletics and that business side of it sneaks in too much, and they're not always going to tell you what the truth. They'll just, like you said, guys, beat around the bush a little bit maybe sometimes, and maybe they're not as
Yeah,
direct in the relationship. I think it's probably better though, like you were talking about having a relationship, but they tell you the truth, at least they're being honest to you, whether it's the answer you wanted or not, you know it's the truth.
yeah. No, I think you're kind of touching on something that I think is probably one of the things that's the most the biggest contradiction, or the biggest point of difference between the experience you have as a college athlete and the one you have as an NFL athlete, or probably true of the NBA or Major League Baseball or whatever, is that there's so much more of an intersection between the sports and the media world, and a lot of the people involved in it, they adopt a persona. They become a character more than they are themselves. And even when you're behind closed doors, sometimes you feel like, am I getting the real you, or am I getting this like media creation that you want to be? Um, and so, those moments where you feel like you're talking to someone on a really like authentic level become less. I won't say that they're non-existent. That wouldn't be fair, but to say that you have those moments more where you're like, so is that really you there, or is this just like some kind of an act that you're trying out so that when you're in front of the cameras, like it makes better sense or whatever? I don't
Yeah.
know. It is one of the bigger differences that you see. And
Yeah.
it holds true for some of the players, some of the coaches, the management for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of it can be a universal thing around, everybody top to bottom.
sure.
You finished your career with the Falcons, and I noticed that you said you were on injured reserve. Was that for the elbow again?
Yeah, the other one,
Oh, okay.
I ended up having problems with both of them. And that one, unfortunately, um, was a situation where, the surgeon that I was dealing with basically, when I went in, he said, listen, it's very, very hard to tell exactly how bad this is or isn't. And his feeling was, when I come out, I'll let you know whether you're done for the year or whether you're done for good. And when I came out, um, he was a little bit in between. Like I'm not really sure. Like I think you might be done for good, but let's, like why don't you give it 6 months and see how it feels and so on and so forth. And so, I wrote out the year there on IR, and then at the end of it, of course, they granted me a release because their feeling was there are people out there that are younger, that are cheaper, that are less injury prone. And I did have a dalliance with the Dolphins again. Their line coach reached out to me right after, and they were definitely, wanted to bring me back in. I went down. I had the visit with them. Um, didn't didn't do a physical with them, which was kind of odd, all things considered. And then later on, ended up finding out that somehow they had obtained some of my medical information from Atlanta and made a decision not to sign me, which turned into a bit of a civil issue between me and them, that got resolved after a couple of years. In my favor, I ended up winning my action in that case. It really wasn't so much against either of the teams. It was really more kind of the insurance company that had kind of breached some data privacy stuff that
Yeah.
was supposed to be going on then. And like I said, it's all good. I mean, the reality of it is that um, it's questionable in my mind whether I would have been able to go, at that point any further. Probably the hardest thing, again, was just dealing with some of the physical stuff. I had managed to be reasonably injury free throughout college. A couple here and there, missed my second year due to an arthroscopy in my knee, but that was like really, really super minor stuff. But once I got in the NFL, I really had a kind of a bad streak. I had the elbows, I broke my hands a couple of times, had a pretty severe high ankle sprain, a few other things, and it just kind of is what it is. I don't feel like it was a lack of preparation or a lack of training or anything like that on my part. I just think that unfortunately, what happens is that you're still developing as a player. Your game changes when you get into the NFL. It has to. It's not college anymore, and you have to spend a lot of time perfecting your game, and in some cases, changing your training methods and things of that nature to accommodate a different type of a game. And when you're spending a lot of time recuperating from surgeries and things of that nature, that's time that you're recuperating, not preparing, and your opposition and your competition is preparing.
Yeah.
And so you end up kind of getting behind. And so, at that point, after that fourth year, and being a little disappointed that things didn't work out with Miami and whatnot, I made a decision to not try to continue to play anymore. I don't regret it. I still believe it was the right call at that time. Um, and quite frankly, the way that the medical stuff was going on, I don't know that anyone would have given me an opportunity at that point anyway.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that really shows how hard it is to have longevity in pro sports. Like when you see these guys that, especially like an offensive lineman that make it 10 to 15 years, that's really incredible. And other
yeah,
athletes, your Tom Brady's going for over 20 years and all that. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, lots of guys, I've interviewed plenty of guys and, their careers end when they're in their mid 20s because of injuries. You just can't go on.
yep, yep, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's brutal on your body, that's for sure. And there's a point too where, like you said, you think you made the right decision. If you kept playing, would you have hurt yourself more and then hindered yourself later in life? And would it have been worth it? And there's all these
Yeah,
things. So, when
yeah,
you put your body first, it's probably always the right choice.
yeah. No, I feel relatively blessed. I mean, I'm certainly not without concern. I mean, there are things that bother me, and there are things that maybe other people at my age don't quite have to deal with. But relatively speaking, compared to some other people that I know, contemporaries of mine who maybe had a little bit worse injuries or had a little bit longer playing career or whatever, I feel relatively healthy and relatively able at this point of my life.
Yeah.
Um, and most importantly of all, obviously, I feel like I've still maintained my mental acuity and whatnot compared to some folks. And I don't know what
Yeah.
the reason for all that is. It seems to be a little bit hit and miss, but man, oh man, you feel bad for some of these guys who just, for whatever reason, the game and or other things in their lives, maybe some of it's hereditary or whatnot, but they really struggle.
Yeah.
And I've known some of them, so it's tough.
It is. Yeah. Well, I want to end the episode on kind of a question, just because you played at Cal in the Pac-12, and obviously in recent times the Pac-12 ended. A lot of teams joined the Big Ten or the Big
Yep.
12, and then Cal and Stanford were kind of left out. Like, what are we going to do? They end up joining the ACC. So, what are your thoughts, just kind of, as somebody who played in the Pac-12 with all this
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah. Listen, I think it's really unfortunate on certain levels. I think, at the point in time when I was in the league or in the conference, I should say, um, there was a there was a good argument. I'm not going to say that it was the only argument, but there was a good argument that Pac-12 football was as good as any football in the country. Um, I understand that people from different parts of the country have different attitudes about that, but we certainly were cranking out tons and tons of NFL quality guys, and in the bowl season, we would typically do really, really well compared to a lot of other conferences. So, like I said, there was a strong argument that it was as good a football as anywhere. And I think over the course of time, that kind of diminished. I think that the conference, excuse me, got itself into a little bit of an arms race financially with other conferences that it was not willing or prepared to win. And I think they got eclipsed pretty badly by like the SEC and the Big Ten, whatever they call themselves now. And um, I guess at some point in time, money talks and all the other stuff walks. And it was. I think it's unfortunate the way that it broke up. I think that it's sad on a lot of levels across college football that you don't have a little bit more of a preservation of the geographic conferences and rivalries. I mean, I'm sure even for people like yourself in the Midwest, there's something really kind of odd about being in a conference that goes all the way from what, like Lincoln, Nebraska to Secaucus, New Jersey, or wherever it is that Rutgers is at. To me, it just doesn't really. I don't know. I mean, I guess I just harken back to a day when Ohio State, Michigan meant everything, and USC, UCLA meant everything, and Cal,
Right.
Stanford meant everything, and all that. And that's kind of gone now. On the flip side, as somebody who lives on the East Coast and will have a lot more Cal road games accessible to him in a way that he didn't in the past, on a personal standpoint, on a selfish standpoint, I'll kind of take it because I'll be able to go down the road to Wake Forest. I'll be able to go up to Syracuse if I want. They're playing in
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. I think they'll play in Boston College at some point. I mean, there's a lot of benefits for me that way. And it'll be interesting to see. I'll be fascinated to see how they translate, into the ACC. I've been very, very impressed with their ability to put together like really good defensive football teams over the last years with Justin Wilcox. I've been to a number of games. They've all been low scoring and narrowly won or narrowly lost. It hasn't been super exciting from an offensive player's point of view. And I'm not sure how that style is going to translate into the ACC. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But I gotta believe it's going to make recruiting very hard for a lot of these schools. Um, I mean, just the mere idea of playing in a conference where so many of your games require you to fly across the country just has to be a hard sell. But I guess everybody's dealing with it now, right? I mean, it's just kind of the
Right.
way that college football and in particular college sports have kind of metamorphosized.
Yeah, I mean, even in the Big Ten now, I mean, Washington, UCLA, USC, it's just Oregon, they're going to be, yeah, I don't know how it's going to affect recruiting. And the rivalry thing, like you said, is really a shame, like Oregon State, how is that going to continue if, probably not. It's going to end at some point. It's going to be
It'll
hard to,
continue only if Oregon wants it to. That's how it's going
right,
to
exactly.
continue.
So, and it's a shame because I feel like as a fan, those are the exciting games.
Sure it is.
Even if the playoffs don't matter for those teams, it's still going to be a good game because it's a rivalry and winning that trophy for your
Yep.
rivalry meant a lot. So
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
like again, as a kid growing up in Cleveland, like I was kind of on that borderline between Michigan and Ohio State. So, like in the week leading up to and in the week leading out of that game, there'd be a lot of I'd say good natured tension, between people in the neighborhoods and whatnot. And you sense the same thing in the San Francisco area when it's Cal Stanford week, and you have people who are friends all year that then they ratchet up their antagonism towards each other in a kind of a good spirited way.
Yeah,
And I think you're going to lose a lot of that. I really do, because I just don't think that the average Cal fan is going to give much of a darn about the upcoming game with Wake Forest,
right.
or the office, talking smack talking with the guy who went to Wake. Like it's just not there.
And if you want to travel to a away game, if Cal was playing at UCLA, that's not terrible for a fan to travel. But what fan is going to travel from, if they live in the Bay Area, are they going to really travel to Wake Forest for an away game? Probably
Right.
not.
Or Syracuse.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
They're not going to buy a plane ticket and follow the team like they might have for some of those other California games.
yeah, no, because I mean, listen, I know for a fact you had a lot of people who would road trip and pack up the RV or the van and drive all over the place, and that's just not going to happen. It's going to, again, it's unfortunate, and I'm sure a lot of good things will come from it, and I'm sure there'll be a different level of excitement and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think that they're running along the same path that in a lot of ways people who criticize like the NFL for no longer being the kind of product that's in touch with the average Joe in their community. Like when I was a kid growing up, if you had a student ID card, you could get into Cleveland Municipal Stadium for a Browns game or an Indians game or anything like that for pennies. I mean, it was nothing. Even for a kid like me who was delivering newspapers, I could afford to get in. And that's gone, I mean, that's
Yeah.
completely gone. And now, you go to a game. I mean, I go to a couple Jets games every year, and it's very corporate. If they're not winning, it's pretty silent in the stadium. A lot of people aren't paying attention the way that they once did, that I recall them paying attention when I was growing up. And so, you kind of lost touch with the local fan base, with the middle class guy or gal who, wanted to go to a game. And I think a lot of what's going on with college football right now is steering in that same direction, right? I mean, if you're $1 million a year earner, yeah, you'll jump in your private jet and go see Cal at Miami. But if you're just a guy who, grew up as a fan of Cal or whatever,
Yeah.
you're not doing that, you know.
No. Yeah, it really, I feel like across sports over the past 15, 20 years, all of the higher ups saw big money bigs, big money signs, and they chased that and really kind of ignored the rest of it. Like you said, the authenicity's gone, the average Joe is kind of gone. And it's a
Yeah.
shame that money takes over and greed takes over and
Yeah, yeah. No, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. I mean, I was very fortunate. Like I said, I grew up in the west side of Cleveland, and back then, like the connection between the community and the professional sports teams was a lot more real. You would go to like the pancake breakfast on a Sunday, and there'd be a handful of guys from the Browns there signing autographs and eating bad pancakes and coffee with your parents, in the church basement. And that's gone. Like that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame, but hopefully there will be good things, like you said, that'll come
Yeah.
out of it, and new rivalries and new experiences, and I feel like change is hard for everyone, so you got to just get into it and see
Yep.
how it goes this season, and then go from there. There's no point in getting too worked up over it.
Yep. So what's your team of choice? In the area you're in, you could be a Green Bay guy, you could be a Detroit guy.
Neither.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
was a Green Bay fan growing up because everybody else was, and as a kid, it was just like, oh, everybody else is, so I will. And I don't know, I kind of just got away from that. I wanted to pick a team that I wanted to root for, so I'm actually a Titans fan. I have
Oh,
been
okay.
for years, big
Interesting.
Titans fan. And same thing with college. Everybody's a Michigan or a State fan. There's a few Wisconsin fans here, but
Yeah.
I'm a Notre Dame fan, diehard Notre Dame fan. I have a lot of family that went to Notre Dame fans, so that one's a little more like that. But yeah,
Right,
diehard
right,
Notre
right.
Dame fan.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, I actually went, I guess it was a couple of years ago now. Cal played at Notre Dame early in the year.
Yeah.
Very tight game, very tight
Yep.
game, competitive game. I went we stayed in Chicago and drove over to South Bend with my wife and my daughter, her now fiance, then boyfriend. The only thing that kind of messed us up was I didn't realize that when you cross over from Illinois to Indiana, there's a time change.
Yeah.
And so I thought we left on time, and we were supposed to go to a tailgate with a bunch of former teammates of mine and whatnot. And I'm getting phone calls on the way in, and they're like, "Where are you at?" Like, run out of time. And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I got like 2 hours left." And it turned out that I had muffed the idea that there was a time change, and so we ended up getting there like literally at kickoff. So missed a
Yeah.
little bit of an
I
opportunity.
think I remember that game because I think I remember being with the mindset that Notre Dame's just gonna wipe the floor with them, and they didn't. And I, as a Notre Dame fan, I was nervous and unhappy and probably yelling at the TV or whatever.
Well, listen, I mean, as an honest appraisal, I went to the game not expecting too much, and was pleasantly surprised to see them play
Yeah.
as well as they did.
But that's more fun, too. I mean, it's really not fun to watch a game where one team just kind of wipes out the other team.
Of
It's more fun
course.
to have a competitive battle. And even if
Yep.
your team is on the verge of losing, I mean, then you're more engaged as a fan. You're not like, it's third quarter, we're up by 40 points,
Yeah,
whatever.
sure. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, David,
Well,
I appreciate you coming on the podcast, taking some
by all
time, and
means.
really enjoyed speaking with you.
Well, I appreciate it. And at whatever point in time that you make it public, just feel free to use my email and shoot me over a link. I'd appreciate that.
Will do.
And
Thanks for listening. Please stay tuned for more episodes soon.